Obviously, a very important news day internationally. We're going to discuss what's happening in Ukraine. You know, normally on a Friday evening, we try to, kick back a little bit, get your brewery, bring a smart kid on here, somebody who can make us laugh, maybe even bring Chris Young back so he can show you his placard or bring his baby onto the set. Did you miss that last night? If you missed that, just go to WPRI.com and click on Air and Dan York's State of Mind, where you can see every show after our original airing at 7:30. By 8 o'clock, we're up with the show online. Anyway, this is it's a tough week. This development and this awful thing that happened with a airliner shot down over eastern Ukraine is the national conversation. There's so much going on here. I thought it would be profound for us to bring back at least one voice to give us a semblance of context on Ukraine, and that is Brown Professor Anna Lysyanskaya. And she laughed because she has a good sense of humor. I've practiced her name 3. I don't know why it's hard for me, but by the time she gets here in 5-10 minutes, I'll have it. Anyway, thank you for your patience with me and tuning into my state of mind. Let's go to the rundown real quick. Yeah, it is an outrage and it's a crime. And I'm glad the president at least used one of those words today when he spoke about it. Back here at home, this humanitarian crisis that we have on our borders is now seeping into New England. I'll tell you the latest on that. That's a number we're supposed to get all happy about. I'm happy. Aren't you happy? S38 Studios getting into the political debate, this time on the lieutenant governor's race, a preview of the newsmakers' debate recorded today. And yes, that will change the nature of the entire Open Championship, no doubt. All right, let's dig in here. Here's the headline on today's developments. The president calls for immediate ceasefire so that we can get some kind of independent investigation on the ground there, a 10-mile stretch, right? I was just happy that he didn't call it a tragedy off the bat. Here's some of what he said today.
Emergency workers and civilians are searching for victims in a 9-mile debris field littered with wreckage and body parts. Ukrainian separatist rebels control the area, so it is not yet known if or when international investigators will be allowed to the site.
Russia, pro-Russian separatists, and Ukraine must adhere to an immediate ceasefire. Evidence must not be tampered with.
The U.S. strongly suspects a surface-to-air missile brought down the civilian airliner as it flew from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur. But aviation experts say the plane's wreckage needs to be examined for residue of missile propellant and evidence the jet's skin was punctured by a high-speed impact.
You know, the president called it an outrage, and you'll see that a little bit later on in the broadcast. That was a good overview for what we're dealing with here, or what they're dealing with here. I hope that you're praying for the souls on this flight. I mean, there were so many kids, and you had people who were going from the Netherlands to Australia eventually for an AIDS conference. You know, researchers, great minds. The mind power that was on that plane, blown up at 33,000 feet. It's just unspeakable. I know there's a God. I hope they're with him. We'll get to that and talk all about what's going on in Ukraine coming up. In the meantime, back here at home, we're making room for the children, I guess. This is quite the development. Boston Globe headline, Massachusetts would give shelter to hundreds, and Governor Patrick talked about it today.
Although this is a temporary shelter, should there ultimately be one in Massachusetts, it will be under exclusive federal control and responsibility. And we have received many, many expressions of support for the children and requests for ways to help. While the reasons for this surge of new arrivals still need to be understood and addressed, and the debate over immigration reform continues, it bears remembering that these are children alone in a foreign land.
You know, I got to respect Governor Patrick. I don't agree with him on this response, to be honest with you. I don't agree with him on a lot of things. But he's an honest broker in many ways of his point of view. He tells you what's happening, he tells you what he's doing, and he defends it. By the way, they're going to Camp Edwards on the Cape, and they're going to Westover in Chicopee. Hundreds of kids are going to be accepted for a 4-month period of time. Contrast that with our governor here in Rhode Island, who, when asked by our own Steve Klampkin at WPRO, my other gig, he suggested that, well, no one's called us directly, but we're still shopping for places, but we really don't know. Here's an expert of his going blah, 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 blah.
Part of my administration is looking just in the contingency, if there are requests, what facilities might be available. So I think all the New England states are doing that.
Are you adverse to taking in any young people?
Well, work with the federal government. I mean, this is obviously a big challenge for everybody. And I believe there are some federal laws that require us to take these children. And whether Congress repeals those laws remains to be seen.
No, Governor, there's no federal law that requires Rhode Island to take those children. Governor Malloy in Connecticut said we don't have any room at the inn. Governor Patrick's got a different disposition. Straight talk from Link Chafee is something that, well, we don't get, which is why he couldn't even muster a re-election bid. I don't know where they'd put these kids and for how long and what the program would be. But next week maybe we'll understand a little bit better. All right, next item here. Hey, headline, everyone's supposed to celebrate. It's time to do a happy dance. Our economy registers the best number in a long time. All right, okay. 7.9%. I just want to mention it. Just don't look at the other states' unemployment numbers, and you'll feel real good that we're down to 7.9%. By the way, there was a gubernatorial debate last night on Channel 10. I watched it and fell asleep. There's no vision, man. There's no vision. There's nothing inspiring. That 7.9 is going to be hanging around for a while, or maybe 7.8. Next item. That was really that downer type of comment, wasn't it? Maybe it's been a long week. I don't know. But my gosh. All right, 38 in the debate. This thing is hanging over us like a hangover. 38 studios. And it continued today as Tim White and Ted Nesi produced a Newsmakers special, a lieutenant gubernatorial debate. Dan McKee, Frank Ferry, and Ralph Mollis. I guess McKee is trying to pin 38 in the lobby mishap on Mollis. And I wonder if it stuck. Here's a piece.
Ralph Mollis turned a blind eye when he could have did something to help the state uncover the issue.
With all due respect to Dan, it's coming from someone whose campaign is significantly financed by the very law firm that is at the center of the 38 Studios controversy, the law firm that advised EDC to go forward with his loan.
He can say he wasn't aware of it, but he was aware of it. 2012, he was aware of it. So you can't walk away from that.
So McKee's trying to pin this thing. You know, listen, Ralph Mollis should have known to ask the question about lobbying in 38 Studios. That Tim White had to bring it to him, stick it under his nose, is embarrassing. Will Dan McKee make this stick? I don't know. We'll have to see the full Newsmakers debate, which, of course, is Sunday, July 20th on both Fox, Providence, and 12. Check your listings for the times nearest, I don't know. It plays like a bunch of times. Lots of times, right? Right? Early morning, Saturday, Sunday, one time in each place. You know how to find newsmakers. Who doesn't know how to find newsmakers? And finally, the wind's blowing. Tiger was struggling. At my last check, he had maybe made the cut, but all of a sudden, it looks like that field is going to start flipping because while they've had one beautiful day on Thursday and a little bit of a good day on Friday, it looks like all Mother Nature's breaking loose for the weekend, which makes the British Open exactly what we all watch it for, a complete, unadulterated golfing train wreck. So we're looking forward to that. Nice little diversion for the weekend. And it's supposed to be a beautiful summer weekend here. When we come back, our Brown professor to explain to us what she thinks about this latest crisis and what's happening between Ukraine and Russia. Stay with us.
Nearly 300 innocent lives were taken. Men, women, children, infants who had nothing to do with the crisis in Ukraine. Their deaths are an outrage of unspeakable proportions. This was a global tragedy. An Asian airliner was destroyed in European skies filled with citizens from many countries. So there has to be a credible international investigation into what happened.
So the president got the tragedy word in there. I mean, it's hard not to put it in there, but at least he began with the word outrage, which was exactly what I was hoping for today. Professor Lysyanskaya, I got it.
Ah.
Nice to see you. Your second visit here. Thank you very much for coming in on short notice. So you're a native of Ukraine, a computer science professor at Brown, but you follow this stuff tooth and nail. You've got a lot of perspective, and you've offered us perspective when this first kind of busted out with the separatists, and of course we started with Crimea, right? Before we get into it, what's your gut check on what happened here? I mean, this is, other than how awful it is.
Well, my first reaction is that we live in a connected world. You cannot have just a local, regional conflict. Something like this is going to affect people all over the world. And it has been affecting everybody figuratively, and now it's affected everybody directly. And this has been a tragedy for a very long time, and now it is a global tragedy.
This meaning the conflict with the separatists, well, first with the advance into Crimea that Putin seemed to be able to pull off with relative ease, right?
That's right.
The whole scheme and the whole vote and the whole thing, which we covered last time around.
Yes, and this has probably given him a huge boost, this Crimea adventure, and spurred him on to continue.
Well, reportedly, the nationalistic feeling in Russia has never been higher, right? It's some of the polling data shows that some 80% of the folks in Russia think this guy walks on water right now.
Yes, and they think that they deserve to be in Ukraine, that especially eastern Ukraine is Russian, and that by going there and fighting there, they are reclaiming historically Russian land. And if that sounds familiar, then we're thinking about the same historic precedent here, about historically land belonging historically to somebody else. So,
well, you've always thought that Putin's almost his version of his Monroe Doctrine is to literally rebuild the Soviet Union in some way, shape, or form, right?
That's right. That is his dream, or at least that is what he is verbalizing as a leader of Russia, so that Russians think that this is the right direction.
And it sells. It sells.
Yes, exactly. That is sells.
I don't know. You can speak from the Ukrainian perspective. What is your guess that the Russian perspective is on this? Has there been just such a down psychological level for them ever since the Soviet Union broke up that they feel like they've got to rebuild? I mean, is there no like common sense thinking in Russia to say, by the way, it's a new age, man? What's your perspective on that?
Well, so in the last 25 years, a lot of things have happened. The Soviet Union broke apart, and everybody, when it first broke apart, everybody was optimistic. Everybody thought that democracy and free market economy will solve everybody's problems. And it actually takes a lot of work before you can have a society that is self-sufficient and functions, before you can create out of nothing a stable market economy. And what the Soviet Union was doing before it broke apart is just drill for oil and sell oil, and like Senator McCain said recently in an op-ed, it's just a ginormous gas station. And that business plan has worked for the Soviet Union, and now Russia, it's been working for Russia as well. So in the 90s, Russia experimented with democratic values and freedom of speech, and that, you know, it works, but it doesn't work overnight. It's not a miracle drug. So because it didn't start working immediately, people got discouraged, and then here comes Putin and says, I'm going to solve everybody's problems. What we have to do is be strong. And everybody says, oh, well, that sounds good. And then, you know, he came, has been in power for almost 15 years, and this is what we have.
All right, so why don't we do this? Let's pause. We'll come back, and we'll talk about what this situation now means, and, you know, what the heck anybody's going to do about it. Stay with us.
Russian President Vladimir Putin blames Ukraine for the tragedy, but the Ukrainian government claims it intercepted a phone conversation in which a rebel commander admits shooting down the plane. But it's unclear what plane he's referring to, and that recording has yet to be verified.
So our Brown professor is a native of Ukraine. Kiev was where you didn't spend a lot of time in eastern Ukraine. It's a big country, right? But what's your perspective on how this whole thing is going to go down? and I'm sure you pay attention very closely to what's happened since Crimea was taken, and now all of this, steady flow of artillery, weaponry, humanity into Ukraine. Well, less humanity, more machinery, right? As the Ukraine separatists rather are really raising hell there. We'll talk about the actual incident in a second, but what's your perspective on the context?
Actually, it is people also. It's not just machines.
They're coming.
Russia
They're
is
just not
waging
marked as
war
Russians.
in Ukraine, correctly.
Yeah.
They're called the little green men, as in aliens. And there are really four kinds of separatists, four kinds of people on the ground. They have people who came from Russia and who are taking orders from the Russian army or the Russian government. So, for example, the prime minister of the so-called People's Republic of Donetsk, he's not from Donetsk. He lives in Moscow. He's a Russian citizen, and yet he's prime minister. The guy who originally took credit for downing a plane and then pretended that he had nothing to do with it, he thought he had shot down a Ukrainian military plane. That guy, his last name is Girkin, but he goes by Strelkov as a pseudonym. He's a Russian citizen, also from Moscow, and he works for the GRU, which is basically the KGB equivalent of Russia. So these are Russian people, and they're the ones who are in charge. Then there are also Russian mercenaries who have been recruited all over Russia, and they went to Ukraine either because they believe the Russian propaganda and they believe that they need to save Eastern Ukraine from some mythical danger, or because just for money, and they've been trained by the Russian military, and there are numerous accounts of that happening. Then there are also Russians who didn't even go and get trained, they just went straight to Ukraine. And then finally the last group are the people who actually live in Ukraine, who for whatever reason, and a lot of it has to do with the Russian propaganda that invents crazy stories about the Ukrainian government that really muddles everything.
The Russian separatists have any legitimate claim about the way the Ukrainian government has managed the country?
The current Ukrainian government is so brand new that it is impossible for it to have done anything wrong in the short amount of time that it's been in power. It's just,
But this unrest was growing prior to that transition.
Right, so the unrest goes back to April, and they were upset with the fact that Yanukovych was driven away. Now, Yanukovych really didn't have that many fans in Ukraine, including Eastern Ukraine. There was no love for him in the east of Ukraine. So for people to be upset that he left meant that they somehow felt that the democratically elected parliament that took control of the country after Yanukovych left, that there was somehow something wrong with it.
But there's an impression that he had a good relationship with Putin, right? So he's out, and all of a sudden you get this kind of de facto type of disposition. Tell me about what you think is going on with this this awful crime. I think this outrageous crime. What's your gut tell you? I mean, you don't have any more intelligence than I do, but I know you've been paying a lot of attention to it. I mean, it's going to come down to, whose missile what, and if you're a betting person, you'd say this is a separatist button push, correct? I mean, they hit a couple planes prior, in weeks prior, military cargo planes.
So we actually do
But this one flies a lot higher at 33,000 feet, right? This was an extraordinary effort.
So we actually know a lot. It is a mistake to say, oh, we don't know. We know. There is satellite data that perhaps it doesn't place, within like a 1 foot, 1 inch radius where the surface-to-air missile system was placed, but it is enough to narrow it down to either the separatist-controlled territory or Russia, or the
All right,
Russian
so given
border.
that it's a separatist move, right? All right, where's Putin standing all this in 90 seconds or less? I mean, it seems to me that internationally he's got a big problem right now, but intra his own country ain't so. So between the sanctions, this mishap, understated, what's next for him in this move? Does he calm this thing down? Does he pull this thing back, or does he just sit it out?
he has painted himself into a corner because something has to give, and no matter what he does, he's going to lose.
Do you think he knows he's painted himself into a corner? For some reason, there seems to be, you know, sometimes I think he's the smartest common sense guy, and then I think he's diabolical. I can't figure out which.
I think that when you live in a country of lies and propaganda, you start believing your own lies. You start living in an alternate reality. And maybe he doesn't know that he's painted himself into a corner. And it's extremely scary what somebody's so...
Is there any way to predict what this shoot down is going to mean for the overall picture? There isn't there, right now?
I think that all we can do is pray. It's hard to predict. I think that we have the power to take some action. We can demand more stringent sanctions. We can demand that our European partners actually sanction them for real.
There's a lot of European death that was involved in this incident, so maybe we have a motivated Europe. All right, I'll have you back. We're short on time. Thank you. I know it's not easy to tackle in just a couple of segments. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Your state of mind is important to us. 228-1886 is the number. You can email us and, of course, post on Facebook. Chris Young's visit yesterday got a little bit of attention. Writes Claude. Claude? I'm sorry, but after hearing some of his unstoppable rants, I cannot think of him as a leader. Well, Chris Young was here last night. Oh, there's the family. There's Mary. There's Kara. There's Chris. You know what? Frankly, he was pretty lucid last night and had some interesting ideas. This whole notion that he wants $100 million from Brown may not necessarily be a pragmatic approach to solving Providence's fiscal woes, but what the heck. All right, you have a great weekend. We'll see you next week at 7:30 and 11:30 on MyRI TV.